these cases have to be taken seriously. It's not a joke. Unfortunately, like I talked about the banana peel, that's the society's perception of it, but our office takes it very seriously.
So if you're hurt after a slip, trip, or fall, what are your rights and how do you recover for your damages? Well, we're going to find out right now on this episode of Ask the Lawyer. My guest is Alberta lawyer Steve Grover. I remind you right off the top, if you'd like to ask Steve questions about your situation, just go to askthelawyer.com. Click the button up at the top that says Ask a Lawyer. There's a very simple form, doesn't cost you anything to ask a question, or you can just call the phone number you'll see on the screen during our conversation. Steve, it's good to see you. Thank you for making some time to help us out.
Nice to see you again. Thank you for having me, Rob.
So let's just, we're talking slip, trip, falls, those sort of things. What are some of the more common ones you see in your area?
Slip and falls is the typical slip and fall where someone slips on ice or, some foreign substance in a shopping center. They fall backwards, they hit their head, or they fracture, or they have a soft tissue injury where they injure their back. We generically use the term slip and fall, but there are trip and falls where you trip over an item, and more the biomechanics is where you're falling forward on a trip and fall. Slip and fall is a generic term that we use, but we see them all in our office: slip and falls, trip and falls, falls in general, stuff like that.
Where are some areas that these occur where there could be cases? Is it shopping centers? Is it municipal sidewalks? Take me through that.
Our office has been doing slip and falls or trip and falls in Alberta for over 20 years. We've seen them all over the board, in front of someone's house where they're not shoveling the snow, on their driveway where there's a build of snow and ice. Unfortunately, someone falls down, injures themselves. We've seen them in shopping centers where, the cleaners of the shopping center are not taking care of the front entrance, and there's a build of water where people slip or trip forward and injure themselves. So, we see them all over the place in Calgary and Alberta in general.
So where does responsibility fall in these situations, Steve? It seems, at first people probably think, hey, it's Canada, there's snow on the ground, it's slippery, you need to be careful. But there are times when can be someone else's fault for these things. Tell me how that responsibility, how do you determine that?
In Alberta, slip and fall, trip and falls. They're generally, governed by the Occupiers Liability Act in Alberta. And there is a duty of care for, give you an example, a shopping center. If you're going in and you're going to go to the Gap and buy some clothes for your daughter, obviously, you're a visitor of the shopping center, you're going to spend your money, and the shopping center has to make sure that the premises is clean and safe. So, there's not a buildup of ice, there's not an ice cream cone that was accidentally left on the floor where it hasn't been cleaned up. So there is a duty of care on, the occupier of the property, like a shopping center. There's a duty of care on, if you own a house in Alberta, to shovel your walk, shovel your driveway, not to create a hazard. I think that's the key in Alberta, is looking to see if there's a hazard, and then looking at what is a duty of care of the occupier of that property, and that usually is governed by the Occupiers Liability Act here in Alberta.
What if it's a municipal property, a government property, something like that? Does that change the case? Does it make it more challenging? What's the thought?
It makes it way more challenging. The biggest hurdle that we find in Alberta, it's not a negligence, it's not a standard of care, just general negligence. You have to prove gross negligence to the city of Calgary, that they knew of the problem, they had someone go out and they said, oh, that's interesting, but they never went back and hired anyone to clean up the area. And that's a very strict standard to meet here in Alberta. When we have calls against a municipality here in Alberta, we have to take them very carefully. We want to make sure that the person is notified, the city, or if it's early on, we can notify them. We have to get our investigators out right away to prove that there is gross negligence, and there's that bigger, higher standard of care, unfortunately, against municipalities or government agencies here in Alberta.
I think sometimes, I don't know if it's just because we call it slip and fall or whatever, but and people are used to, you fall down, you get a bump, you get up and you go on. But as you mentioned earlier, it seems like some of these could have very serious injuries involved in these.
Yeah, growing up, you always see the cartoon where, someone's walking, they slip on a banana peel, they fall back, and everyone laughs. Unfortunately, that is the perception of society of a slip and fall. But, you know, I've been doing this for 20 years. I mean, these cases are very serious. If someone has a duty of care to, you know, shovel their walk, and, you know, they know, you know, someone's going to be over at their house, and someone falls down, you know, and breaks their leg, or breaks their hip, and it's ongoing, you know, injury that will affect their ability to work, and there's treatment. I mean, these cases have to be taken seriously. It's not a joke. Unfortunately, you know, like I talked about the banana peel, that's the society's perception of it, but our office takes it very seriously. We, you know, investigate these claims. You know, we want to hold the person accountable, because if it wasn't for that hazard, that person would have never slipped and fell, never injured themselves, and, you know, their life would have been as it was before the accident.
We talk all the time, every time we talk, Steve, I think about how important it is to get an attorney involved early. I would think, especially in these kind of cases, because conditions can change so quickly, that it's really important to get somebody start the investigation as early as possible.
Yeah, and, you know, in the Calgary area, we have something where they're called Chinooks in the winter time, where it could be minus 20 one day, and these warm winds come off the Pacific Ocean, go through the Rocky Mountains, and the next day it's +5. That creates a problem here in Calgary, where the ice and snow will melt right away. In the evening, they turns to ice. So we have that issue here in Calgary. In Canada, generally, yeah, it's a snowy condition. We have winter. But, you know, our duty is to get out there. We hire investigators right away to go out, take pictures, you know, talk to witnesses, get pictures of the shoes our client was wearing, what type of clothes they're wearing, making sure the person knows what they fell on, because that's a really important question, because I've got a lot of people have come to see me in my office, and they say, well, Steve, I fell. And I'll ask them directly, well, what did you fall on? I don't know. Well, unfortunately, you know, we can't prove there's a hazard there, and unfortunately, you don't have a case. And so it's really important to do your investigation right away before you file suit on the claim.
Lots of really helpful and interesting information, Steve. Thank you for making some time to answer our questions.
Thank you. Have a great day, Rob.
That's it for this episode of Ask the Lawyer. My guest has been Alberta lawyer Steve Grover. I remind you, if you'd like to ask Steve questions about your particular situation, go to AskTheLawyers.com. Click the button at the top that says Ask a Lawyer. There's a form, and it doesn't cost you anything to ask your questions. Thanks for watching. I'm Rob Rosenthal for Ask the Lawyers.